and decreasing that risk. So investing in renewables has a tangible value for the resource sector. I don't think that's a leap to say that, and we're just going to see that direct link become stronger and stronger. So that's very exciting. So now we're going to move to hear from two mining companies that are leaders in this area of climate-related disclosure and looking at decarbonization, and also get a perspective in terms of decarbonizing material movement, which is an area that came up quite a bit on the Hydrogen Day as being a key area of focus for mines to try to reduce their carbon emissions from fleets. So we're going to start with a case study on developing a roadmap for a low-carbon economy. And it's my pleasure to introduce Peter Wan. Peter is the lead of technology and innovation with Teck Resources.
Okay, well, thanks for having me here today. I'd like to talk about developing an innovation roadmap for a low-carbon economy, and I guess I want to highlight the use of the phrase innovation there, because as a member of our technology and innovation team, what I'm going to talk about is how we've got involved in the decarbonisation strategy, but obviously there's a lot else going on in the company in other areas as well. Just a quick overview of Teck. A lot of people in Australia don't necessarily know who we are. So we're a Canadian mining company, headquartered in Vancouver, and with business units in steelmaking coal and base metals being copper, zinc, lead, and we do have some interests in oil sands in Alberta as well. We have operations that range from above the Arctic Circle in Alaska, down through the Americas and into Chile. So that presents a wide array of environmental challenges when we look at things like renewables. And half of our operations are located in British Columbia, and we've got a blessing there as well, in that our grid in British Columbia is 92% renewables, primarily through hydro. And so when we look at the renewable space, the challenge is probably less for us than it is for other mining companies. But then when we do look at implementing renewables, if we do go ahead with renewables in BC, we definitely have a lot less radiation than you do here in Western Australia. So sustainability is a core value for Teck, and we formalised that with a sustainability strategy back in 2011. And our strategy looks across 6 main focus areas. And the area that I want to focus on today is, of course, around the energy and climate change piece. In setting those sustainability goals back in 2011, we did set short-term goals of 5, 10-year goals and pushing out to 2030. And we're currently in the process of re-evaluating those goals and setting what we expect to be much more ambitious targets to roll out early next year. So in our approach to climate action, we I guess, separated it out into these 4 key focus areas. We have a larger focus on adapting to physical impacts, and so, if we're in areas such as Canada and Alaska, where we're subjected to, extreme winter conditions and the more extreme events that we're seeing with climate change, they can have pretty significant impacts on our business. And as an example, our Red Dog mine in Alaska, we have a shipping window to get everything in and out of that property that extends to no more than 100 days. And if we have more flow ice or brash ice in the Chukchi Sea, our window might be limited even more, and so that could have a pretty significant impact on our operation up there. So in terms of reducing our carbon footprint, as with everything that we do, it's always good to have that measure of where you are at the start and where you want to get to. And again, we're in a fairly good position in terms of being in the lowest quartile for both our copper operations and our coal operations. And again, our Scope 2 emissions are pretty low, and that contributes to that, but there's obviously a lot more that we can and must do moving forward. So in setting these goals, we've set in a number of areas. Our greenhouse or our energy intensity or overall consumption is one of those goals, and we are on track for achieving our 2020 goals, so that's good. And in our greenhouse gas emissions, our goal was to reduce by 10%, and I guess back in 2010 when they were being set, that seemed like a fairly ambitious goal, and now I think everyone realises that we need to do a lot more than that. And so as we look to our 2040 goals, they're definitely going to be a lot more challenging than a 10% reduction. The next one there, we'll talk about engaging with partners to achieve our alternative energy goals. And our alternative energy goals is to commit to 100 megawatts of renewables or alternative energy by 2030. And we've done this in a number of ways so far. Around 2010-2011, we partnered with Suncor Energy in Alberta on a wind farm there. That was commissioned in 2011-2012 and has been successful, although we have divested our interest in that farm and we're moving on to other focus areas. Another activity that we've done in this area as well, which doesn't directly contribute to, I guess, our Scope 2s, but we have a mine in British Columbia called the Kimberley Mine, which is a closed property now, and the town of Kimberley has installed a solar farm on that property, which is now known as the Sun Mine. So we've been actively engaged in that process without having ownership of it, and we're now negotiating with the City of Kimberley to potentially purchase that back from them. We've also implemented renewables down at Quebrada Blanca. So Quebrada Blanca is in northern Chile, out of the town of Iquique, for those that are familiar with Chile. Capacity of 21 megawatts, and in December we sanctioned the phase 2 of the Quebrada Blanca operation, which is going to require the construction and commissioning of a concentrator and desalination plant and significant pumping to get that desal water from sea level up to 4,500 metres. So our energy requirements for that operation are definitely going to increase significantly. So we're currently in the process of renegotiating and converting our PPAs from coal-based power to a higher renewables content, which I believe in the initial term is going to be around 50% renewable content, and as our other operation in Chile comes up for renewal in the next couple of years, we're looking to increment that again. When we look at the efforts that we've done to date since the setting of our sustainability goals in both energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, they've really covered a broad range of projects. And what we've appreciated in the last couple of years is that most of the projects that have driven us towards achieving our energy consumption and GHG goals, the reduction in energy consumption and reduction in GHG emissions has actually been a secondary benefit of most of those projects. So we've looked at it and we've said, you know, things like optimising truck flow through the crusher. Obviously, there's the primary driver for that project is around productivity improvements and better utilisation of our equipment. And we've benefited on the side from the reduction in emissions and fuel burn as a result. So that's where we enter into introducing the innovation and technology team. So 2 years ago, our CEO realised that while we have a long innovative history within the company, including introducing differential flotation and other technologies like aeromag in Canada and machine guidance, we need to realign our efforts and be more focused and deliberate with our limited innovation resources. And we're realising that there's a number of key areas that we need to do this in. And so we've divided our innovation and technology team into 5 key focus areas around automation, robotics, digitalisation, ore body knowledge, and then we have 2 in the sustainability area. Eco-efficient mining covers water, air and tailings, and then my area of focus is around the low carbon economy. And what we see with the low carbon economy, and what we believe is that obviously there's, and we heard about it from the finance people this morning, is that there's a shift in focus towards expectations on mining companies to reduce our emissions. And so our short-term focus is to reduce those emissions with the transition of fuels, but also, and probably just as importantly, introducing transformative mining processes. Just quickly looking at what our emissions profile looks like. This is from 2017, and we're only focusing on scope 1s and 2s in our initial innovation focus. If we have opportunities for some low-hanging fruit in scope 3s, we'll definitely take them. And you know, we rail a lot of our product to port, and we have other potential opportunities to work with our vendors or our suppliers in that area. So there will be action taken there. But when we look at it, the largest focus area for us is mobile equipment. And this is almost exactly the same number as Kirsten Rose from BHP quoted yesterday, in that it's about 35% of our overall greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to come back to that mobile. This is the older deck, isn't it, Adrian? Okay. So when we look at the stationary combustion, we use natural gas dryers across our coal operations to dry our coal prior to shipping. So there's a couple of areas that we're looking at where we can reduce our emissions in this area. We have a lot of fines produced in our coal, and so we have a project at the moment to look at what opportunities we have to coarsen that coal and essentially pelletize it, so that rather than selling it as fines, we can sell it as a higher priced or more valuable commodity in pellets. And in doing that, there's a hope that we'll be able to significantly reduce the amount of coal that goes through the dryer. And so we're piloting an extrusion plant at one of our properties this year. There obviously is an energy intensity associated with the extrusion plant, but the hope is that, again, with hydropower there, that more than offsets the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. The other area that we have there to look at as well, then, depending on what happens on the outcome of the coarsening coal, is point source capture from the dryers, and I guess taking some interest in some activities that are happening here in Australia around capturing of emissions in underground mines and potentially even repurposing that into an alternative fuel. When we look at the emissions capture, this is probably the hairy beast out there for us in fugitive methane, and anyone that is mining coal, this is a very challenging beast. All of our operations are open pit. It's not quite as easy as capturing methane in an underground mine. Not that I'm belittling that effort. That's definitely a well worthwhile and challenging effort in itself. But our operations are in the Rocky Mountains, and when we look at others that are doing anything in the methane emissions, either capture or establishing credits in that area, it's primarily happening in the Powder River Basin, where they have flat-lying 90-foot seams, and we're talking about 1 or 2 metre seams in heavily faulted Rocky Mountains, and so what we're going to do there is going to be very challenging. Given that we also have interest in the oil sands and fugitive emissions are a big issue there, we're leaning into the COSIA, which is the Oil Sands Industry Alliance that has joint projects to resolve these sorts of issues that are common to the oil sands industry. And they have a big focus at the moment on methane, first of all, measurement, and then abatement. So our Teck Energy group is taking a lead role in some of those projects and really trying to understand what those emissions, where they're coming from and what we can do about it. We do have a carbon tax in BC. Fugitive methane emissions are not taxed at this stage. We report, but we don't tax. And the calculations that we use just for the reporting purpose alone, I guess it's commonly accepted that they have a minus 50 plus 200% level of accuracy. So our first step really is in measurement and understanding truly what we are emitting, and if we can get a better understanding of where it's coming from, perhaps we can target some opportunities to capture. I talked about the energy projects in the top of the screen there. The one that's down the bottom is interesting. The Canadian government started up an initiative late last year called the Crush It Challenge. And the Crush It Challenge challenged innovative companies to put forth ideas or concepts for innovative comminution technologies that would significantly reduce the energy intensity of our crushing and grinding efforts. And so we've been active in a couple of those companies that have bought challenges or bought projects to that challenge. And at the PDAC conference in Toronto in February, they announced the semi-finalists, and we have a couple of interests there that made through to the semi-finals. And so the semi-finalists in that program now have funding to take their concepts to a proof of concept or demonstration stage. And ultimately, I think it's around this time next year, there'll be an award, and I think, if I remember correctly, it's about $1 million award to the winner of that challenge to then take that product to commercialisation. So it's a pretty interesting approach, and we're very grateful that the Canadian government is doing that and helping us in terms of our efforts to achieve more efficient comminution. But as you can see in this chart, the area that we're focusing on probably the most at the moment is in the mobile equipment space. We've looked at projects like dual fuel LNG. We ran a pilot of a dual fuel LNG haul truck at one of our coal mines in 2016. Unfortunately, that project didn't meet its performance criteria on a number of levels. One of them was that it just so happened that when that project was run, the diesel price dipped fairly significantly, and so the economics of natural gas weren't quite as favourable. That operation is 1,000 kilometres from the coast and from the liquefaction plant, so transportation of the gas was also didn't help the economic case. And then the methane slip from the technology itself actually ended up in the haul trucks being GHG positive rather than negative. So we then went down the path of doing a lengthy due diligence with another dual fuel technology. But again, the challenges were fairly significant in terms of matching the technology to the truck fleet that we had at another operation. And the time commitment that would be required for that project to realise value and add significant NPV. So we're stepping away from LNG, and our focus is really around other forms of zero emission vehicles. One component of the technology and innovation group that I didn't mention earlier is that as part of that we've introduced an internal innovation fund that we call Ideas at Work. And that fund is to provide seed funding to projects that would not normally make it through our project framework, or that are innovative and have a somewhat nebulous or grey project outcome. And so this funding is driven to help us get those projects going and see if they're going to actually shift the needle for the company. And one of the very first projects that we got through Ideas at Work was a couple of electric buses. And so we're going to be introducing a couple of electric buses into the Elk Valley, which is where our steelmaking coal operations are in BC. And those buses transport all of our workforce to and from the mine site. And so for me, it's a great way to shake up not just the bringing in zero emission vehicles, but it creates a cultural awareness. All of the workers will get on these buses and experience the ergonomics of electric vehicles, so the lower noise, lower vibration, better air quality, and really, I guess, start changing their mindset around what an electric vehicle is. In the Elk Valley in BC, when you go to the car park where the bus picks everybody up, I'd say the ratio of pickup trucks to cars is probably 9 to 1. And so everybody wants their big truck, and you know, they think that that's what's needed for power. And so by introducing them to the electric buses, we're hoping that changes mindsets, so that when we say to them we want them to be the operator on an electric grader or a dozer, they'll be much more willing to recognise where the benefits are for them as well. We've got a fantastic wrap on the bus, the graphics on the bus that talk all about zero emission vehicles and you know, the benefits of them to the environment, and also our contribution in terms of copper and steelmaking coal to these types of vehicles. But unfortunately, I can't show that yet. We're not quite ready for release of the graphic. One of the other areas that we're looking at is support equipment, of mobile equipment, and the gentleman from Kirkland Lake Gold referenced the Macassa mine and the 80% battery electric vehicles there. And there's a real little hub in Ontario of companies that are actively working in this space towards electrification of underground equipment. And that's fantastic. I love seeing it, but unfortunately it doesn't help us in the open cut space quite yet. But I've been advocating for, when you think of innovation, is taking what's happening in another industry and applying it in our industry, and if we can take those examples from the underground and apply them in the surface operation. And an example that I've been talking up is we use cleanup dozers around all of our rope shovels. And when you look at a cleanup dozer, it's not that different in format to an LHD underground. We have risks associated with cleanup dozers. They always come in too close, the shovel swings around and the counterweight takes off handrails, and potentially one day it'll take the cab as well. So a low profile LHD, close to a source of power where it can back up. It's low utilisation, so plenty of time to sit on the charger and be ready for its next run. To me, it's a great application, and I'd love to have an OEM come up and say, yeah, we're willing to give that a crack. But there's others as well. We're working with other companies, I can't name today, but others that are actively pursuing electrification. And again, in that hub in Ontario, there's companies that have been willing to commit in terms of all of the non-recurring engineering costs of taking a vehicle that they're electrifying for another mining company, and if we have a slightly different model and a lot of those engineering costs are already covered, then we're going to farm into that project hopefully and expand the fleet of electric vehicles that supplier is going to produce. And so that's, again, another way of us is sort of looking laterally and trying to get zero emission vehicles on the ground as quickly as we can. But haul trucks are obviously the largest opportunity for us when we think that 35% of our emissions are coming from mobile equipment, and for us, probably 65% of those emissions are coming from haul trucks. I'll let you do the math on that. We're looking at a number of our operations at trolley assist, and this is it's not just a mature technology, it's a grey-haired technology waiting for someone to pick it up. We've seen recently Boliden in Sweden picking it up at their ATIC operation, and there's examples of very mature trolley systems, most specifically in Africa. So what do we need to do to make this technology successful in our operations? We have low-cost power in BC, it's clean power. We do have limitations on our transmission capacity into the Elk Valley, so there's a big consideration there. When we did the back of the envelope calculations, if we were to electrify 2/3 of our truck fleet in the Elk Valley, that would increase our electrical demand by 200%. So, there's a significant transmission cost or other ways of bringing energy into the valley for us to do that. And then mine planning was a big consideration when we looked at this too. So one of our operations has done a really great study on trolley, and it produces some very positive NPVs. And if you look at the existing mine plan for that expansion project, the NPV was attractive, but there was big gaps between when we could utilise the trolley efficiently. And it goes without saying, the more tonnes we can get up that trolley line, the bigger value it creates. And so by resequencing some of the mine planning, we could basically unlock great value and double the NPV on that project. And then the other interesting thing, as part of our innovation program, we're rolling out autonomous trucks. And when you look at a trolley system, and the suppliers of the trolley lines will tell you that you're limited to a 200-metre turn radius on a trolley line, or else the drivers aren't going to be able to keep the truck on the trolley line. You look at the path of autonomous trucks on their haul roads, and they're so precise. We believe that we can tighten up that turn radius significantly, and rather than having two discrete trolley lines on a ramp, you can potentially have the trolley on the whole length of the ramp, and that's going to produce about a 65% reduction in fuel burn from our calculations at the moment. And another interesting factor too then is you get to the top of the ramp and you've got a flat haul out to your dump location. Rather than flat hauling, what if you run the trucks up about a 2% grade to the point where they overcome rolling resistance on the slight downhill grade, and basically they're coasting there and burning minimal fuel there. They're on idle essentially there too. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities with trolley. But just as importantly with trolley, I think the really exciting thing for me is, does that create a springboard to battery electric? We all know that the challenge of battery electric at the moment is primarily around range. What if we can run them on trolley, charge them up while they're on trolley, and then just have a very limited sort of last mile capacity on battery? I think that's a really exciting opportunity. I mentioned that one of our other technology and innovation themes is around ore body knowledge. And one of the areas that we're working in ore body knowledge is in ore sorting. And if we're sorting at the face, can we minimise the amount of total material movement and how much we're taking to the plant? And so then the possibility arises, well, what if we're putting the material into some form of crushing or into some sort of hopper and putting it on a belt for that scanning at the face? Why would we then put the material back onto a truck to move it again? We saw a reference from, I think it was BHP or maybe it was Rio yesterday, around relocatable, sorry, it was Fortescue, about relocatable conveyors. So, what's the opportunity for us to implement a technology like that? So we've got some sort of opportunities where these themes come together, and we need to look at that further as well. In yesterday's session, Kirsten Rose also talked about the need for education, which I thought was interesting. These next few slides are really just an example of some of the internal slide decks that have been put together to start that education process internally. And it's just talking about the efficiency of electric motors over diesel and the benefits of that. So basically we're using around half the total energy that we would from a diesel engine. But then these other benefits as well, obviously the GHGs, the NOx, the SOx, and the maintenance costs. When we look at the maintenance costs or the operating costs for our electric buses, we're predicting that they're going to be about 20% of the maintenance costs of a diesel bus. And when we've gone to visit bus operators down in California, they've validated that number. I'll whip through these quickly because I see that I'm running way over time. I get a bit excited. So we've identified what we think are some of the key areas that we need to focus on and help us move forward. The batteries and charging I've talked about. The funding is an interesting piece as well, and just very quickly, we do have the carbon tax in BC, and BC is returning some of that in an innovation fund. So we can apply for innovation funding on projects that are going to reduce our GHGs, and that will be essentially our carbon tax return to us for those projects. And the build knowledge piece is one that I touched on briefly as well, and so we need to get as many zero emission vehicles into our operations as quickly as possible. Start learning about all those aspects of electric vehicle or zero emission vehicles that are significantly different around maintenance, operation, planning, design. And one of the conduits that we're using for that is the ICMM, and I'm going to leave that as my little segue for Louis to talk about further. So, thank you.